afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. So far this summer, potentially toxic blue-green algae blooms have forced several beach closings along Lake Champlain. The State Health Department reports there are no documented cases in Vermont of human illness related to blue-green algae. However, department officials do urge people to be cautious and to pay attention to posted closings and warnings. One of the keys to determining whether a beach should be closed is the work of volunteers who monitor areas of the lake for the presence of the blue-green algae. Rebecca Gollin tells us more about the monitoring program.
For a landlocked state, summertime in Vermont offers all sorts of water-based recreation. The many lakes, rivers, and swimming holes around the state provide opportunities to cool down wherever you are. But anyone who spends time on the water in Vermont knows that the quality of that water can change quickly.
It could be greener than pea soup here on Tuesday, and it could be crystal clear on Saturday.
Mike Roach is a volunteer water quality monitor on Missisquoi Bay. One of the biggest issues for Lake Champlain, and certainly the one that's in the news the most, is blue-green algae.
The title blue-green algae is actually a little bit of a misnomer because it's not an algae, it's a cyanobacteria. It's a bacterium, cyanobacteria. It is a planktonic organism, which means it floats in the water column and can't swim. It photosynthesizes, so it's taking its energy from the sun.
Mike Winslow is a scientist with the Lake Champlain Committee, the organization that oversees the monitoring program. He and his team train volunteers around the state how to spot and identify areas of concern.
They look like a paint spilled on the water. There's no structure to the bloom itself. If you were to take a stick and try to lift it up, it would just drip right off the stick and not stay. Maybe coat it like paint, but you're not going to see any individual stringy things hanging off.
Identifying potentially harmful algae can be tricky because it's naturally present in the lake anyway, and not all concentrations or blooms release harmful toxins. The algae can also move in and out of areas very rapidly.
The blooms are triggered by high nutrient levels, high water temperatures, and still water. So we'll get a period of heat wave, you're more likely to see a bloom. You get areas of the lake with higher nutrient concentrations like Missisquoi Bay, St. Albans Bay, you're more likely to see blooms there. Under some conditions, which we don't really understand, the algae produce substances that are toxic.
When the blooms do become toxic, children and pets are the most vulnerable, although anyone can be affected.
The toxins generally cause gastrointestinal illness, vomiting, diarrhea. They can, if inhaled, cause respiratory distress, sort of like an allergies. You get sore throat, runny nose, watery eyes, something like that.
Winslow says that while toxic algae is, and should be, a cause for concern, the good news is that most of the time, and in most parts of the lake, there is no need for concern.
We received over 600 reports during the 2013 monitoring season, and fewer than 3% actually reported back that they saw blooms.
Those that did see blooms were likely to be in areas like St. Albans and Missisquoi Bay, where shallow water, heat, nutrient overload, and just the right wind direction causes regular outbreaks. Bob Martell lives in Alberg, where he's been a volunteer water quality monitor for 8 years.
72.2. Take a good look at it, the area around, see if there's any algae, any indications of it, check the water temperature and record that, and then fill out the online report.
Martell says that while he hasn't seen the very large blooms that can occur, he has seen a number of smaller accumulations.
We've had some episodes where it maybe stayed around for a couple of days, and then it dissipated, and it was good for the rest of the season, or till the next episode. But there weren't that many.
What are some of the things that you've seen?
I have seen clear water somewhat. We'll show you some of that. I have seen putrid green water that would just stick to you. It sticks to your legs, smells, and it's horrible. I mean, those are the spectrum, basically, and anything in between.
Roach and Martell report their observations to the Lake Champlain Committee and enter their findings online for an interactive map maintained by the Vermont Department of Health. Alongside the monitor's observations are data and reports from scientists from around the state as well as New York. This kind of collaboration is key in the effort to keep tabs on the water quality of the lake.
So we're looking at water that people are most likely to be in contact with when they're kayaking and swimming.
Angela Shambow is an aquatic biologist with the state of Vermont. She spends a lot of time traveling to sites around the lake, taking samples and testing the water quality. Although the visual monitoring the volunteers are doing can provide a great deal of information, there's no way to tell without testing in a lab what kind of algae is present and whether it's toxic.
I think we probably have more than 150 different kinds of algae that we've documented on Lake Champlain over the course of the time that we've been checking. So the primary data that we collect each year from mid-April through early November is things like phosphorus, nitrogen, silica, chlorophyll, all the kinds of bits and pieces of data that will tell us what the water quality in Lake Champlain is like.
On this day, Shambow and fellow aquatic biologist Pete Stengel are visiting several of the 15 stations they monitor regularly.
Well, Lake Champlain overall has really good water quality. We're concerned about it. We don't want it to deteriorate, which is why we do talk a lot about what you can do to protect water quality. We're quite fortunate. There really are only 2 locations on Lake Champlain that have thick, dense blooms that persist for a period of days to weeks rather than just disappearing relatively quickly, and those are St. Albans and Missisquoi Bay. And in those locations are where we have found the toxins at concentrations where we are concerned. Doesn't happen every year, doesn't happen every year at the same time, and that's what makes it so difficult, which is why people are concerned. But in the last 2 years, since I've been coordinating the cyanobacteria program, more than 90% of the reports that we get back each summer show that the water that the volunteers are assessing at their feet and that Pete and I are seeing out on the lake is considered generally safe. It's not that cyanobacteria aren't there, they probably are, but not at concentrations that we're worried about.
The data collected by all of these groups over time gives lake water quality experts the big picture of the lake's health.
We do produce an end of the season report each year that looks at the number of reports that we received, what percentage were Category 1 clear water, what percentage were Category 2 a little bit of algae, which were Category 3 full-blown blooms.
These scientists and citizen volunteers are keeping a trained eye on the water and helping protect the health of the lake, the people, and the economy of Vermont. In Burlington, I'm Rebecca Gollin with Across the Fence.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next segment also relates to water quality. Scientists point out that good soil helps control erosion, which in turn helps improve water quality. To prove it, specialists with the Natural Resources Conservation Service offer a demonstration. Keith Silva explains.
It's going in a lot easier.
Aaron Pratt and Sarah LaRose are soil conservationists with the National Resources Conservation Service in St. Albans.
This is usually like the hardest sample to get because it doesn't hold together because there's no roots.
Pratt and LaRose are looking for a soil sample to be used in a rainfall simulator. They're digging in this cornfield to find a good example of a common agricultural practice.
So this is a sample from a cornfield that's been in corn continuously for 40 years.
This sample will be used to show how much water runs off and infiltrates the soil when 2 inches of rain falls on it per hour.
This is a rainfall simulator, and the buckets in front basically are going to show the runoff from the different types of soil samples that we have here, and the buckets in the back are going to show the infiltration rates to the different types of soils that we have.
The sample from the cornfield goes alongside another similar example of exposed and aggressively tilled soil. There are also 2 other soil samples in this demonstration. Both of those examples represent ground that's received minimal tillage and has been managed using cover crops. Once the simulation starts and the water begins to soak in, or not, the results are obvious.
It's such a good visual of where your soil is going when it's not covered that it might make them think twice about just tilling everything up and leaving everything bare, because the soil is basically what they need in order to make their crops. And if the soil keeps leaving their properties, then they're basically losing their own livelihood.
The practice of growing the same crop on the same acreage year after year is known as monocropping. In addition to increasing the chance for erosion, monocropping also decreases soil health. Rotational grazing, growing different crops on the same acreage, increases soil health, promotes biodiversity, and keeps the ground covered to prevent erosion.
This is a simulator. It gives us that visual. It helps us understand what is going on in that rainstorm. It boils down those messages about cover, about diversity of different crops, about the importance of having roots in the soil, different roots, diversity of roots, all those really important things that make a healthy living soil. That is what we can see as we're running this rainfall simulator. We can see the results of that and why it can help us keep our lake clean. It can help us have water in our soils for those drought times. You know, it really helps us both in terms of production on the farm, but then also in reducing those environmental impacts off of the farm.
The greatest asset of every farm is its topsoil. It's in those top 2 to 8 inches where a farmer's fortunes are won or lost. Impacts like planting and plowing, farming, expose topsoil. So making sure those practices are properly managed goes a long way to improving soil health.
What I'm trying to turn this into, it's going to look visually like chocolate cake. It's going to look so good you want to eat it.
Eric Noel raises beef cattle on Health Hero Farm in South Hero. Noel is a longtime practitioner of soil conservation techniques like pasturing, crop rotation, and minimal tillage.
I always look for root causes because you find a root cause of something, you fix that, and you take care of a lot of other problems around once you find the root cause. And I figured out that you fix the soil, you get the fertility up, and you get it so it's like chocolate cake and it'll infiltrate, and you get increased forage volume, increased nutrient density in the forage, which goes to getting more feed into the cattle, more nutrient dense feed into the cattle, which increases their weight gain. So it goes to the bottom line of the beef production also.
Noel and his family moved from a farm in Highgate to this farm in South Hero about 1.5 years ago. When they started getting the land ready for production, Noel knew it was going to take something heroic to get the soil to meet his needs.
This is our second growing season, and last year what we started with was nutrients that were very low, especially phosphorus, which is energy into the plant. And over the course of 2 growing seasons, we've done some amendments and some practices, and year on year we've increased the weight gain on cattle by 15%. Last year we were topping out about 1.7 pounds a day gain. This year we're pretty close to 2 pounds a day gain on the cattle, which is what I want.
Noel knows what he does with his soil goes beyond his farm gate and puts him on the same footing as his fellow Vermonters.
No matter where you are, you're in a watershed, and when the rain falls, it's going to end up someplace. So it matters to everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a farmer, if you're a landowner, a developer, or somebody that lives in the city. It doesn't matter. If you've got land and water hits it and rain hits it, you need to be thinking about this stuff, because the water is going to end up someplace. If you're not utilizing it and soaking it up where you are, it's going to run off for the most part, because a lot of the practices we use right now with farming and development and roads and highways, they don't think about what the water's doing.
This demonstration proves there's nothing muddy about this debate.
There's no way to hide it. There's no way to say, well, that really isn't the issue. It's very clear, or not so clear.
When it comes to the conservation of natural resources, everyone is on even ground. In South Hero, I'm Keith Silva with Across the Fence.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you for joining us. That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.